as Russian drones, jet fighters and reconnaissance aircraft increasingly violate NATO airspace, the bloc is on high alert.
Ale ta sytuacja, która stawia nas wszystkich bliżej otwartego konfliktu, bliżej niż kiedykolwiek po II wojnie światowej.
If Russia is allowed to push the limits of what it can do without retaliation from NATO, this could spin out of control.
Here's how Russia is pushing NATO's boundaries and what could happen next. On September 9th, NATO radar and warplanes engaged some of the 19 Russian drones that flew deep into Poland. Within days, Romania's Air Force reported another Russian unmanned vehicle in their airspace. A week later, NATO jet fighters intercepted 3 Russian warplanes that violated Estonia's airspace for 12 minutes. That same day, Germany scrambled its Eurofighter jets to head off a Russian reconnaissance plane that was flying with its transponders turned off over the Baltic Sea. Days later, drones were reported elsewhere in Denmark, including over its main Air Force base, which is home to most of its F-16s and F-35s. NATO said other member states, including Finland, Lithuania and Latvia, also reported recent airspace violations. Some defense experts say Russia is testing the bloc's resolve.
Putin is determined to weaken, if not to dismantle, the NATO alliance. And he's become more brazen in his efforts. And I think at a minimum, the drone attack on Poland was a massive escalation. I mean, this just wasn't one bird that came in. This was 19. A number of them are said to have been specifically configured for that long-range mission, having the fuel tanks larger than necessary for a strike against Ukraine.
If we assume that it is Russia behind these incursions, I think one aim could be to see what Europe is actually willing to do against such incursions. They're also meant to force Europe to reconsider the extent and the nature of its support for Ukraine. Denmark, for example, has donated all its artillery to the Ukrainian war effort. But if European countries all of a sudden are forced to protect their own airspaces against these incursions, well, then maybe they might need some of those weapons themselves.
Russia has denied that drone incursions were caused by deliberate actions and said its planes didn't cross into NATO's airspace. But President Donald Trump says European members of the bloc should respond with force.
Mr. President, do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
If you shoot down a Russian jet, that would dramatically escalate tensions with Russia and lead to a massive diplomatic crisis. But we don't frankly know how Russia would react. And I think that's a step that at least we haven't seen NATO willing to take quite yet.
So far, European countries have chosen a more cautious approach. Following the incursions into their airspaces, Poland and Estonia called for consultations with the North Atlantic Council.
If NATO countries were to shoot down the drones, well, that also poses some challenges. If these drones don't pose a direct military threat to a country, then it's probably riskier to shoot them down because these drones are going to hit something when they land on the ground. And finally, if European countries were to make a habit out of shooting down drones, well, then they could quite quickly drain large parts of their missile arsenals.
And there are high costs involved. Some Polish military experts estimate that the operation to take down the cheap Russian drones would have cost around $8 million. And of the 19 drones that entered Poland's airspace, only 4 were downed.
Some Western security officials will say that what NATO needs is a sort of drone wall to better defend Europe against drones coming from the outside. But some drones are launched from within the country that they target. For example, with the incursions in Denmark, Danish authorities say that these drones were launched in the vicinity of Denmark, not from a country far away.
Let's not forget that, Ukraine has been in this business now for a decade, and they've got fairly robust air defenses, and the Russians are still getting a lot of missiles through. What we really have here is not a lack of capability, but lack of political will to respond with, suitable determination and force to compel Putin and Russia into a less belligerent position.
Some analysts warn that while NATO taking direct action could raise the risk of conflict, the alliance's muted response poses a greater threat for the continent.
So I fear that in the absence of a more robust Allied response to this Russian incursion, we have to prepare ourselves for a even escalatory step or aggression by Putin against the alliance. He is gunning to break the will of the alliance, to fragment the alliance, by demonstrating through the alliance's own inaction that the alliance has lost the will to fight, that the credibility of its Article 5 security guarantee is no longer there.